I need you to picture something with me. Picture a woman sitting alone in a parked car at the end of a driveway. Engine off, hands still gripping the steering wheel. Not because she forgot to let go, but because some part of her body understood something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. The windows starting to fog from the inside out, that thin film of condensation creeping in from the edges. Outside, the winter queen's air pressing against the glass. Cold that doesn't just touch your skin, it reaches through it, finds the joints, settles in the cartilage like it owns the place. That woman was me. But before I tell you what happened when I finally walked through that door, I need to take you somewhere else first. I need to take you to the end. To the moment everything cracked open. I am standing in a hallway at my son Marcus's holiday party. I am 74 years old in my bright coral house dress with big pockets, and I have just handed over an envelope fat with $5,000 in cash, because that is what love looks like in my family. That is what my mother taught me. That is what I have done my entire life, converted every feeling I had into something I could press into someone else's hands. I am watching Marcus, my firstborn, the boy whose entire 4-year college education I paid for out of my own savings. Every textbook, every dorm deposit, every tuition check, 48, all were over 4 years that I didn't blink about because he was my blood. I am watching him press my envelope into his father-in-law Rodney's hands. His back is to the room, his head is slightly dipped, and his lips are moving. I read lips the way old women who've spent decades in loud church halls learn to read lips. 3 words, clear as anything. Don't tell her. I will come back to that moment. I will walk you through every inch of it. But right now, I want to go back further, because you need to understand the whole shape of this thing before you can understand what it cost me to take it apart. Let me take you to Queens, New York, out past the crowded parts, past the bodegas and the bus stops and the noise, out to the rural outskirts where mobile homes sit wide and low under open sky, and you can sometimes forget you are still inside one of the most complicated cities in the world. This is where I live. Have lived for years. In a converted attic apartment with sloped ceilings that make you duck in the wrong spots, and one window, that faces west, so you get the last of the afternoon light if you're lucky and sitting in the right chair. It was winter, same as it is now in this story, and the cold had been keeping me inside the way it always does. I am a woman whose bones feel the temperature drop before the forecast does. That season had a bite that went deep, and I had spent the morning the way I spend most mornings, with my prayer, said before my feet ever touched the floor, and then with the slow business of getting myself decent. That day I put on my bright coral house dress with big pockets, the one that makes me feel like myself, like the woman I actually am, instead of the woman other people have been slowly trying to convince me I'd become. I had baked fresh cornbread before I left it cooling on the counter of my small kitchen. I remember standing at that window, my one west-facing window, looking out at the flat, wide sky and thinking about how far it was to drive to Marcus and Delia's, and whether the roads would be icy by the time I was heading back. The kitchen smelled like butter and cornmeal and warmth. I left it all behind and got in the car, and then I sat in the driveway of their house for 11 minutes. I know the exact number because I watched the clock on the dashboard click from 6:36 to 6:47, and I couldn't make myself move. My stomach had a feeling I did not have a name for yet. Something hollow. Something careful. I thought about the cornbread on the counter at home. I thought about turning around. I had a photo album on the passenger seat, one I'd brought to give Marcus some old pictures his grandmother would have wanted him to have. It's been with me for decades, that album. Cracked spine, brown around the edges, photos starting to fade the way photos do when they're full of people who've already lived their whole lives. Marcus as a baby, Marcus at his graduation. Me, always somewhere in the frame, always holding something. A dish, a baby, a check, always giving, always in the background, always proud of it. I sat in that car in the cold, with the clock ticking and my stomach saying, "Turn around," and I did not listen to my stomach. I picked up the album. I tucked the card with the $5,000 into my coat pocket. and I went inside. What I found in that hallway changed the count on everything I thought I knew about my own life. You want to know how a woman gets to 74 years old and doesn't see what's been happening right in front of her? I know you do, because I've asked myself the same question about 1,000 times since then, usually at 3 in the morning when the heat in my attic apartment makes a clicking sound and the one window is black with winter dark. Here is the honest answer. It is not one I'm ashamed of, but it is not comfortable either. I was raised on forgiveness like it was a food group. Not the kind of forgiveness you give yourself after you've made peace with a situation. The other kind. The kind that asks you to absorb what was done to you and call the absorbing holy. My mother was a woman who believed, down to her marrow, that blood was a covenant. That family was the highest thing. That whatever a child did to a parent, whatever a husband did to a wife, whatever someone with your last name did to you in private, you covered it. You prayed over it. You forgave it before they even asked because that was what God expected and what love required. I inherited that belief the way I inherited her hands. Wide, capable, always reaching toward somebody else's problem. Marcus was my firstborn. He came into the world during a July heat wave and he screamed loud enough to rattle the windows. And from the first minute I held him, I would have given him anything he asked for. I did give him anything he asked for. The college tuition was the largest of it, but it was not the first. I paid his first security deposit when he moved to Manhattan at 22. I co-signed his first car loan when his credit was too thin. When he married Delia, I paid for the flowers at their wedding because Delia's mother said her budget was stretched. I am telling you these things not to perform suffering. I am telling you because I want you to understand the particular mathematics of loving someone the way I loved Marcus. It did not feel like sacrifice while it was happening. Sacrifice implies pain at the time of the giving. What I felt was purpose. I was building something. My son's life was my investment, my joy, my proof that I had done the one thing I was supposed to do in this world. The quilts tell that story too. I quilt blankets for each grandchild. Have for years. I started the tradition before Marcus and Delia's oldest, Jalen, was even born. Each quilt is different. I choose the colors based on what I know about each child's personality, and I spend months on a single one. There is something about that kind of handwork that requires you to be still enough to think. My mother used to say that quilting was a woman's way of speaking when the room wouldn't let her talk. I should have listened to what those quilts were trying to tell me. The earliest sign I remember, and I mean truly remember, not reconstructed in hindsight, but something I felt and ignored, was a Sunday dinner about 6 years before that holiday party. I had made a meal from scratch. Collard greens, baked chicken, cornbread similar to what I'd make years later the night of the party. Marcus and Delia came. The children came. I was happy. But at some point, Delia made a comment about a neighbor of mine. A comment that was just sharp enough to make me look at her twice. And Marcus laughed. Not the laugh he gave when something was genuinely funny. The other laugh. The one that meant he was agreeing with something he knew I wouldn't like but didn't want to confront directly. I let it go. That was my practice. I covered it. I prayed over it. I forgave it before anyone asked. My hobby used to be quilting in community. I would bring my squares to church and work alongside other women. But somewhere over the years, I stopped going as often. I told myself it was the cold, the drives, my joints. But the truth is that Marcus and Delia had a way of making outside connections feel like a small disloyalty. Delia would say things like, "I don't know why you need to go all the way over there when you could just rest at home." She said it warmly. She said it with a hand on my arm. But after enough repetitions, I started to believe that rest was what I needed, that the women at church didn't really need me, that staying home was the sensible choice. I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, how did she not see it? And I want you to hear me when I say this. The fog doesn't come all at once. It rolls in slowly. One small accommodation, one gentle suggestion, one soft rearrangement of your time and your people, until one day you look up and you cannot see past your own front door. My faith should have been my anchor, and in some ways it was. Every morning before my feet touch the floor, I say my prayer. I have said it so many times the words are worn smooth in my mouth. That prayer kept something in me alive that I now understand Marcus was trying to reach. But even faith can be isolated. Even prayer can become something you do alone, when it used to be something you did in a room full of warm-bodied women who knew your name. The cornbread on my counter the night of the party. I had made it for myself because I wanted something from home before I went into that house. Something that smelled like my own kitchen. Something that was mine. That instinct was the last healthy thing I trusted before everything changed. Because on the drive to the party, I had noticed something. A text message from Marcus, sent 2 days earlier and then quickly followed by a correction, an apology, a never mind. I had not opened the first message in time to read it before he deleted it. But I had seen the first 3 words in the preview on my phone screen before it disappeared. Daddy Rodney says. That was all I caught, Daddy Rodney says. I sat in the driveway for 11 minutes trying to talk myself out of what those 3 words had already started in my chest. After that night, after I drove home with my stomach turned inside out and climbed the stairs to my attic apartment and sat down in the one good chair I have that faces the west window, I did something I had never allowed myself to do before. I stopped forgiving long enough to look. I want to tell you what that actually feels like, because I don't think people talk about it honestly. It does not feel like strength, not at first. It feels like cold water on your face in the middle of the night. It feels disorienting and ungracious and a little bit violent, because you are not just examining someone else's behavior, you are excavating your own willingness to overlook it. And that is the harder dig. I got out the photo album. My cracked spine, faded picture album that had been riding on the passenger seat all night like a quiet witness. I opened it on my kitchen table and I looked at the photographs the way I should have been looking at my own life, without the softening lens of love and forgiveness, without the reflex to make excuses, without the practiced theology of blood being thicker than evidence. Marcus at graduation, me standing 3 feet behind him, beaming, holding a program I'd been clinging to all day. I had driven 4 hours to be there. I had worn a hat I bought specifically for that day. I had cried. I had been so proud of him that pride was a physical thing, a pressure behind the sternum that made it hard to breathe. I looked at that picture for a long time. And what I saw, finally, was not the graduation. What I saw was the 4 years of tuition checks that preceded that moment. 40 A's, $, dispersed in installments, written in my hand on my checks from my bank account. An account I had spent decades building on a home health aides income. $48,000 that I had told myself was an investment, not a sacrifice. I got a legal pad from my kitchen drawer. I started writing numbers. The tuition, $48, $0. The security deposit on his first apartment, $200. The car loan co-signature, when he stopped paying and the payments fell to me for 7 months, $4, $900. The wedding flowers, $400. A decade of cash envelopes, birthday, Christmas, emergencies, $22,000, conservatively. My sister Gloria's house. I stopped on that last one because it doesn't have a clean number the way the others do. What it has is a story that I had been telling myself incorrectly for 7 years. Gloria was my older sister. She died of a stroke without much warning, and she left me her house in her will because she said I was the one who had always showed up when things got hard. It wasn't a grand property, but it was a house. It was real estate in New York. It was wealth of a kind I had never held before. And within 8 months of the reading of the will, Marcus had convinced me to put his name on the deed for tax purposes. He sat at my kitchen table and explained it to me with a folder of papers and a calm voice and the particular authority that educated children have over parents who never went past high school. I trusted him. Of course I trusted him. He was my son. I never got a single document back. He told me the property taxes were too high and I should let him handle the potential sale. He told me the market wasn't right yet. He told me not to worry, that he had it under control, that I was better off not thinking about it. And I believed him, because my belief was sewn into me like thread. Blood and family must always be forgiven, must always be trusted, must always come first. When Connie called me that January Tuesday morning, Rodney's wife, Delia's mother, a woman I had always been polite to but never considered an ally, I was sitting in my one-window chair watching the frost patterns on the glass. Her voice was shaking. She said she hadn't slept in 2 weeks. She said she had found bank records. She said she had watched Rodney deposit my $5,000 holiday gift into his personal account, and that there were records going back 3 years of similar transactions, my birthday money, my Christmas envelopes, passed to Rodney by Marcus and categorized in Marcus's bookkeeping as family loans that were then written off as personal expenses. She said, "Doris, I think you need to see all of it." I did not cry when she said that. I want you to understand that. I had expected, if something like this were ever confirmed, that I would fall apart, that I would wail, that my knees would go. Instead, what I felt was a terrible, clarifying quiet, the way a room sounds when a loud noise finally stops. I asked Connie to send me everything she had. She did. I spent 3 days going through it, and then I went back to my legal pad. $48 in tuition, $22 in cash gifts. The house from Gloria's estate, which a real estate attorney later told me was worth approximately $285 at the time of the sale, Marcus orchestrated without my full understanding. A sale in which I received nothing. Total given to my son and his family over 20-plus years. A number that began with a 9 and had 4 more digits behind it. What I had received: Mother's Day cards, occasional flowers. 1 year, a picture frame with a stock photo of a sunset still in it. Proof that someone had walked through a drugstore checkout line and handed a cashier money for an object that came preloaded with someone else's idea of beauty. I set my pen down. I could not pick it up again for a long time. The photo album sat open on the corner of my table for the rest of that week. I didn't close it. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to keep looking at the evidence of my own face, that wide, proud background of every photo face, until I believed what I was seeing was real. Her name was Ruth. I have to tell you about Ruth carefully. Because people like Ruth do not announce themselves as the person who is going to change the direction of your life. They just sit next to you and keep working on their quilt squares, and one day something is different between you, and you understand that the space between 2 chairs at a church quilting table can hold more truth than a decade of family dinners. Ruth Harriet Simmons, 71 years old, retired school librarian, maker of the most precise half-square triangles I have ever seen in my life. We had been sitting side by side in that quilting circle for 3 years. 3 years of Tuesday evenings, of thread and scissors and the particular comfort of having your hands busy while your mouth moves. I thought I knew her. I knew she liked her coffee black and her hymns traditional, and that she had a daughter in New Jersey. I did not know that the daughter in New Jersey had spent 6 years systematically draining Ruth's savings account. Ruth told me in February, after I had told her what Connie showed me, after I had finally put the numbers from my legal pad into actual words and said them out loud to another human being. I had chosen Ruth because she was the woman I trusted most to not repeat what I said. What I had not calculated was that she would tell me she already knew. Not my story, her own. She described the mechanisms her daughter had used, and the language was so similar to mine that I had to set down my quilting and look at her. The same gradual isolation from other family members. The same steady accumulation of small financial asks that individually seemed reasonable. The same leverage of a parent's belief in forgiveness and blood loyalty. The same architectural patience, as if the whole scheme had been planned in advance rather than improvised by ordinary human greed. You know, you might be thinking right now that this kind of thing is rare. An exception. Something that happens to other people's families, in other cities, with other circumstances. I need you to hear me very clearly. It is not rare. Ruth knew exactly what I was describing the moment I started speaking because she had lived inside it for 6 years. And when I looked at her face, this steady, dignified woman who could do a perfect flying geese block without a template, and saw that she recognized every single detail of my story, I understood something important. I was not uniquely foolish. I was one of many. Ruth did not tell me how to feel. She did not comfort me in the way people comfort you when they want you to calm down and stop being a problem. She told me what she had done. She told me the specific steps, the specific people she had talked to, the specific decisions she had made when she stopped being a mother who forgave everything and became a woman who protected herself. She said, "Doris, the hardest thing is not what they took. The hardest thing is forgiving yourself for how long you let them." I held that sentence for several days before I could open my hands around it. What Ruth gave me was not just emotional support. She gave me a blueprint. She connected me with the attorney she had used, a woman who specialized in elder financial abuse and property law. She sat with me while I made the first phone call. She held my coffee cup while my hands shook. That is what an ally looks like. Not someone who fixes it for you. Someone who sits next to you while you figure out how to fix it yourself. I went home that night, and I looked at my photo album one more time. Marcus at 8 years old, missing his 2 front teeth, holding a fish we'd caught together at a park upstate. I remember that day. I remember the way he laughed when the fish splashed. I had loved him so completely in that moment that the memory still had heat. That love was real. It is still real. But love being real does not make exploitation acceptable. And it took me until age 74, sitting across a church quilting table from a retired librarian with perfect half-square triangles, to understand that those 2 facts can exist in the same breath without canceling each other out. I kept the fish photograph. I set the album in the closet. It was time to stop looking backward and start building forward. If you have ever had to pretend, in someone else's company, that everything is fine when you are actually dismantling their entire scheme from the inside out, then you know what the weeks after my conversation with Ruth felt like. I want to describe it accurately because people tend to romanticize this part, the planning, the strategy, the gathering of evidence, as if it feels empowering in real time. It does not. Not at first. In real time, it feels like walking on the inside of your own chest. I called Marcus the week after I met with the attorney. I kept my voice exactly the way it has always been with him. Warm, a little tired, a little casual. We talked for 22 minutes. He asked how my joints were handling the cold. I told him about a new chamomile tea I had been drinking. He complained about traffic on the 59th Street Bridge. I laughed at the right moments. I asked about the children. He told me Jalen had made the honor roll. When I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time with my hands flat on the table, just breathing. Ruth had told me that the performance phase was the hardest part, and she was right. Not because of the deception itself. I am not a woman who enjoys deception, and pretending I had not seen what I had seen felt like holding my breath underwater. The hardest part was the grief running underneath everything else. You can be completely clear-eyed about what someone has done to you and still love them at the same time. That contradiction doesn't resolve itself. You just carry both things and keep walking. The attorney's name was Margaret Chen, and she had the calm, specific energy of a woman who has heard every version of this story and is not surprised by any of them. She told me I needed something recorded, something that came directly from Marcus in his own voice, in his own words, confirming his awareness of the financial redirection. The documentation Connie had provided was valuable but secondhand. What we needed was primary. The trap was my idea. I am not ashamed of that. Ruth had done something similar with her daughter, and when she described it to me, something in my chest said yes. That is exactly how you do this. I called Marcus on a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after my kitchen table conversation with Ruth. I told him I had heard from a distant cousin's estate attorney, a cousin he had never met, who had died 2 years ago in North Carolina, and that this cousin had left me a small inheritance. $8,000. I told Marcus I needed his help depositing it properly because I didn't fully understand the tax implications of inherited money. This part was important. I told him it would arrive as a check made out directly to me, and that I would need to bring it to him to deposit in a joint account we could set up for the grandchildren's education fund. I said the phrase slowly. Education fund. I could almost hear him sit up straighter on the other end of the phone. He said he would talk to Rodney, who knows how these things work. He said it so naturally, so reflexively, as if the arrangement were already established machinery, already operating, already understood between them as the thing that happened with Doris's money. I said, "That's wonderful, baby. I knew I could count on you." Connie was already in place. I had spoken with her twice in the days before, and she had agreed, reluctantly, then more firmly, then with something that sounded like relief, to be present at her own home when Marcus came to meet with Rodney the following weekend. She had a phone. She knew where to hold it. She had been sleeping badly for months, she said. This was the thing that would let her sleep. On the morning before the meeting, I changed the locks on my own front door. I want to tell you what that felt like, because it was the moment everything shifted for me emotionally. The locksmith came at 9 a.m, a young man in a gray jacket who replaced both locks in 40 minutes and handed me 2 sets of new keys. 2 sets, both mine. I stood in the doorway of my converted attic apartment with the sloped ceilings and the one window, and I held those keys in my palm, and something in my body exhaled that had been holding its breath for years. I had been afraid, I realized. Not of Marcus, not exactly. Afraid of the emptiness I imagined would exist if I stopped centering his needs in my own life. Afraid that removing him from the position of importance I had given him would leave a hole I couldn't fill. But standing in that doorway with new keys in my hand, I felt something I hadn't expected. Fullness. A specific kind of personal sovereignty that has no adequate word, but that every woman over a certain age will recognize immediately when I describe it. My door, my locks, my keys, my choice about who enters. Saturday came. Connie recorded 47 seconds of audio. Marcus and Rodney discussing exactly how to receive my inheritance check and redirect it before I noticed the path it had taken. Marcus's voice, clear and unhurried, explaining the routing as if it were something he had explained before, as if it were a practiced system, as if the money that came from his mother's life and labor were a resource to be managed rather than a gift to be honored. 47 seconds. I have not listened to the recording more than twice since then. I do not need to. Some things you only need to hear once to know everything. The attorney had what she needed. And so did I. You want to know something about rage? Real rage. The kind that lives in a woman who has waited her whole life to be looked at clearly. It is very quiet. People expect rage to be loud. They expect it to break furniture and flood eyes and crack voices. That is not what I had. What I had in the weeks after Connie sent me the audio file was an absolute crystalline stillness. Like the surface of a frozen lake that looks smooth from a distance, but is under enormous structural pressure. I drafted the email 17 times. Not because I didn't know what I wanted to say, because I knew exactly what I wanted to say, and I was committed to saying it in a way that could not be dismissed, deflected, or characterized as the confused ramblings of a 74-year-old woman who didn't understand how money works. Marcus had written those exact words to me once, in a text I had screenshot and saved. You were always too emotional to understand how money works. I kept that screenshot in a folder on my phone titled Reference. The attorney reviewed the final draft. She made 2 small suggestions. I accepted one and declined the other because the line in question was mine, and I needed it to stay exactly as I had written it. The email went to Marcus, Delia, and every family member whose email address I had. It included the audio file from Connie's recording. It included the photographs of the financial records she had documented. It included the pages of my legal pad, the actual handwritten pages, scanned by the attorney's office, with my numbers and my handwriting visible. And at the top, above everything else, I wrote one sentence. I counted. Did you think I never would? I pressed send on a Monday morning at 7:14 a.m., right after my prayer, right after I put my feet on the floor and stood up in my attic apartment and felt the winter cold through the floorboards and decided that this was the day. The attorney had already filed the complaint with the state licensing board. The documentation was in. The process had begun without fanfare, without drama, without me needing to perform my pain in front of anyone who might not deserve to witness it. The professional machinery of accountability was already turning. I had done my part quietly, carefully, precisely. I want to tell you about Rodney's car. I had seen it once before, at Marcus and Delia's house. A Lincoln Navigator in burgundy red, parked in their driveway like a declaration. I had never thought much about it. I was not a woman who thought much about cars. But after Connie showed me the bank records, after I saw my gift money flowing into accounts that purchased exactly that kind of comfort, I thought about that car differently. I thought about the particular arrogance of a man who takes from an old woman and then parks his acquisition in plain sight of her, confident she will never know. I thought about it, and then I let it go. Because here is what I have learned at 74 about other people's expensive things. They are not proof of anything except that someone had access to resources. A man can drive a Lincoln Navigator in burgundy red and be completely bankrupt in every dimension that actually matters. A woman can live in an attic apartment with sloped ceilings and one window and be richer than anyone who has tried to take from her. Wealth is not always the thing you can see. Sometimes it is the thing you protect. Marcus responded within an hour of the email. He called me first. I let it go to voicemail. Then he texted. Then he called again. Then he sent the email I had expected. The one full of the language I had spent 20 years being managed by. I was confused. I was emotional. I had misunderstood the arrangements. He was only trying to help me. He had always only been trying to help me. He wrote, Mom, you were always too emotional to understand how money works. I need you to think about what you're doing to this family. I read it once. I forwarded it to the attorney. Then I went to my kitchen and I made cornbread. I filled the attic apartment with the smell of butter and cornmeal and warmth, and I sat in my one west-facing window chair, and I watched the winter light move across the rooftops until it was gone, and I was not sad. I want you to understand that. I was not sad. I had passed through sadness some weeks earlier. What I was now was something harder and cleaner and more permanent than sadness. I was ready. There is a particular silence that follows an email containing 47 seconds of audio, 3 years of financial records, and a mother's handwritten math. It is not the silence of nothing happening. It is the silence of too many things happening at once, simultaneously, in rooms you cannot see. I knew the professional complaint was moving through the state licensing board process. I knew the email had reached everyone I intended it to reach. I knew Marcus had received it and chosen denial as his first response. What I did not know, and what came to me in pieces over the following week, was how many other tables that email had landed on,
and what conversations it had started in houses I had never sat inside. Delia's sister called Connie. Delia's sister had questions about Rodney. Those questions led to a conversation that led to a confrontation that led to Delia's family beginning their own proceedings against Rodney for things that had nothing to do with me. Money that had gone sideways in other directions, other arrangements that had seemed reasonable until they were placed under direct examination. I did not orchestrate that. I want to be clear. I did not send the email to blow up Delia's family. I sent it to tell the truth about my own. But the truth has a radius. When you finally speak it clearly and directly and with documentation, it does not stop at the edge of your own story. It moves outward. Marcus called me 9 times in the first 3 days after the email. I answered on the 4th day. I want to describe that conversation accurately because people ask about it, and I never quite know how to explain what it felt like to finally hear him without the filter of my own forgiveness softening every word. He was not contrite. He was strategic. He was calm in the way that people are calm when they are calculating rather than feeling. He said the recordings were out of context. He said Connie had her own agenda. He said I had allowed myself to be manipulated by people who wanted to damage his career. He said, and this is the sentence I want you to remember, he said, "After everything I've done for this family, this is how you choose to treat me." After everything he had done for this family. I sat with that sentence for a moment. I thought about the $48 Jewero in tuition, the $22 Jewero in cash gifts, Gloria's house, the fortune of a retired home health aide that had been redirected, slowly, over 20 years, through mechanisms designed to be invisible to the woman providing it. I thought about the corner of family dinners where I had always sat, slightly outside the center, holding something, smiling, grateful to be included. And I said, "Marcus, I counted everything. I have been counting for 20 years. You thought I didn't understand how money works. But I understood exactly how it works. I just didn't know you did too." He started to respond. I spoke over him, not loudly. I want to be precise. I did not raise my voice at my son. I have never raised my voice at him in his entire life. And I was not going to start at the moment of our greatest reckoning. What I did was simply continue speaking, steadily, without pause, without apology, without the old familiar reflex to soften what I knew to be true. I said, "The license complaint is filed. The documentation is with the board. The property matter is with the attorney. I do not need you to understand any of this. And I do not need you to agree with my account of it. I am telling you because you are my son and I am your mother, and I owe you honesty even when you did not extend me the same." Then I said, "I forgive you. I want you to know that. But forgiveness is not the same as permission. I forgave you while you were still doing it, and it didn't stop you. So this time, I am coupling the forgiveness with a consequence." He said something else. I do not remember exactly what it was. I remember that it did not move me. That is the part I want you to hold on to. Not the anger, not the confrontation, not the evidence or the legal filings or the email that went to the entire family. The part I want you to hold is that moment when I realized his words had stopped landing. That something in me had become too clear, too settled, too solid to be rearranged by his voice. The licensing board suspended his financial advisor certificate pending investigation within 6 weeks of the complaint filing. His employer, a wealth management firm in Manhattan with a reputation it had spent decades building, placed him on administrative leave. 3 private clients whose money Marcus managed, when they saw his name in the complaint filings, terminated their relationships with him. 3 people who had trusted him with their financial lives, the way I had trusted him with my own, looked at the documentation and made the rational decision that this was not a man whose judgment they could stake their futures on. Rodney, facing questions from his own family about money that had disappeared in multiple directions, retained an attorney of his own. I did not watch any of this with satisfaction. I want to be honest with you about that, because I know what you might expect. That justice landing on someone who wronged you feels triumphant, feels vindicating,
feels like the reward at the end of the story. What it actually feels like is very quiet, like watching rain through a window. Something necessary is happening. You can see it clearly. But you are inside, where it is warm, and the rain is outside, and you realize you have no more business to transact with any of it. He lost the income. He lost the professional status. He lost the clients whose net worth he had been managing. He lost the particular story he had been telling about himself. Competent, responsible, educated, someone who understood how money works. And that loss, I think, was the one that cut deepest for a man like Marcus, who had always known exactly what his credentials were worth. I am not glad about it. I am not sad about it either. I am simply clear about what it means. There is something I have not yet told you about the day I changed the locks. After the locksmith left, after I stood in the doorway with the 2 new keys warm in my palm, I went back inside and I opened the photo album one last time. I took out 3 photographs. The fish one, from the park upstate when Marcus was 8. One from his college graduation, not the one of the 2 of us, but a small one from earlier in the day, before the ceremony, where he was standing with his gown on and laughing at something a friend had said, purely happy, not performing happiness for an audience. And one of the grandchildren, Jalen and the twins, sitting on the floor of the living room with quilt squares spread all around them from a day I had brought my work to their house and let them help. I put those 3 photographs on the windowsill above my kitchen sink, where I would see them every morning. I closed the album and I put it in a box, not because the memories inside it had stopped being real, not because the love had died, but because an object can only hold so much history before it starts to weigh more than you can comfortably carry. And I was done carrying things that were not mine to carry. Ruth came with me to the attorney's office the day we finalized the property documentation. The house from Gloria's estate, the sale that Marcus had orchestrated without my full knowledge, from which I had seen no profit, had been sold to a buyer who still held the property. Margaret Chen, the attorney, had found a discrepancy in the original deed transfer paperwork, something Marcus had filed improperly 7 years ago, that created grounds for a legal challenge. The settlement was not for the full value of the property, but it was something, an income, a portion of the wealth that Gloria had intended for me, restored through the quiet, determined work of a woman who did her job very well. I paid Margaret Chen's invoice. I paid it myself, from my own account, from my own money. Then I called a real estate company in a warm climate state. I am going somewhere where my bones don't ache in winter. I have been looking at communities in the South, places with wide porches and good light, and communities of women who know how to build things with their hands. I found a small house, not large, but properly mine, with ceilings that don't slope and more than one window. And I put down a deposit that was entirely within my means because I now know, precisely, what is and is not within my means. I have looked at the Lincoln Navigator in burgundy red twice now. Once online, once at a dealership where a young man with excellent posture explained the features to me while I sat in the driver's seat and thought about how the leather felt and what it would mean to own a car simply because I wanted to. I told him I would be in touch. I will look at it a 3rd time when I arrive at my new home, and by then I will know whether it is the right choice or whether something else is calling my name. Ruth threw me a small going-away gathering at the church. 4 women from the quilting circle, coffee, store-bought cookies that were not as good as mine. She gave me a quilt she had been working on for 3 months without telling me. The colors were coral and gold and a deep, warm amber, and the pattern was something called a grandmother's flower garden. I held it, and I could not speak for a moment. Ruth put her hand on my arm the way she does, the steady, quiet way, and she said, "You taught me something too. Remember that. I am almost finished with Jalen's quilt. I will ship it to him when I'm settled in the new place, and I will include a note that is just for him. Not for his parents, that says, 'The things you make with your own hands belong to you.' That is a lesson I want planted in him before the world has a chance to convince him otherwise. The grandchildren saw what their father did. I know that. I cannot unknow it. But I believe, and this is not a naive belief, this is a choice I am making with full knowledge of what choices cost. I believe that watching their grandmother refuse to disappear is a lesson that will outlive the damage. That seeing a woman at 74 stand inside her own life and say, "This is mine," I counted. I did not miss it. That is a thing a child carries forward. It is a different inheritance than the one Marcus had planned for them. The morning I left my attic apartment for the last time, I stood in the doorway, and I looked at the sloped ceilings and the one west-facing window and the small kitchen where I had made 10,000 meals and cried at the table and sat with my legal pad and finally added up the true total of my own life. I turned off the light. I pulled the door closed behind me. I heard the lock click. My locks, my keys, my choice. It is spring now, not winter. I notice that difference every single morning. And every single morning, it still surprises me the way genuinely good things still have the capacity to surprise you, even when you chose them deliberately. The light here in the south comes in early and stays late, and the warmth is the kind that goes all the way through rather than just touching the surface. My joints have not ached in 2 months. I did not know until they stopped that they had been aching continuously for years. I have a porch. This is not a small thing. This is a porch with 2 chairs and a railing and a view of a street where people walk in the evenings and wave at each other. And I sit on that porch in the late afternoon, and I do my quilting in the open air with the light still good. And I talk to my neighbor Evelyn, who has lived in this neighborhood for 40 years and knows where everything is and can recommend the best cornbread in a 3-mile radius, though I have my own opinion about that. Marcus and I have not spoken since the phone call. I do not know whether we will speak again. I hold that uncertainty without drama. The love that lives in me for him is not contingent on resolution, but it is also not a rope I am willing to extend indefinitely into a space where it can be used against me. If he arrives one day with genuine accountability, not strategy, not calculation, not another construction of language designed to reposition what he did as something I misunderstood, then I will be here. I am not a woman who closes doors permanently. But I change the locks, and the new keys are mine. Delia's family sorted themselves out in ways I was not involved in and do not need to be. Rodney's situation moved through channels I was not responsible for watching. Marcus's licensing case is still pending with the board. These things move slowly, and I have stopped tracking the pace. What matters to me now is not the speed of his consequences. It is the quality of my own life. There is something I want to say directly to you, whoever is listening to me from wherever you are sitting right now. What happened to me has a name. It is called elder financial abuse, and it does not happen only to women who were careless or ignorant or weak. It happens to women who loved too thoroughly and trusted too automatically, and believed, as I believed, that blood was a covenant that the other party would honor. The mechanics of it are specific and recognizable once you know to look for them. The gradual isolation from other relationships, the positioning of the abuser as the competent one who handles things, the slow normalization of financial involvement that never has complete documentation, the leveraging of a parent's forgiveness as a renewable resource. My grandchildren witnessed these mechanics in action in their own home. That is the part that sits heaviest with me. Not for my own sake, but because I understand, I have had to sit with the understanding, that intergenerational trauma does not announce itself. It does not come with a warning label. It disguises itself as normal family behavior because the people performing it learned it somewhere, and the people around them normalize it because love makes normalization feel like generosity. When a parent takes without accountability and faces no consequence inside the family structure, the children watch and absorb and carry that model forward. What I did, naming it, documenting it, refusing to absorb it silently, is the counter lesson. I hope it lands. I pray for it every morning before my feet touch the floor, in the prayer I have always said, which now ends with, "Thank you for letting me see." Research reveals that only 1 in 24 cases of elder financial abuse is ever reported. 23 women, for everyone like me who speaks. 23 women sitting in parked cars in the driveway, not ready to go inside, feeling something wrong in their stomachs, and driving home anyway and saying nothing. I was almost one of those 23. The only reason I was not is that Connie couldn't sleep, and Ruth was sitting next to me at a quilting table. The WHO estimates that nearly 16% of seniors in communities suffer this kind of abuse every year. Most of it at the hands of people who share their blood, their history, their family photographs. Those numbers are not abstract. They are women I see on my street. They are women in your town. They are women who have built lifetimes of giving and are watching pieces of what they built walk out the door in someone else's name. If any part of what I have told you today lives inside your own story, if you are sitting somewhere right now with a legal pad and a stomach that has been saying something is wrong, I need you to hear me. You are allowed to count. You are allowed to add up what you gave and what you received and let the number mean what it means. You are allowed to change your locks. You are allowed to move somewhere warm. You are allowed to keep 3 photographs and put the rest in a box. I have one final thing to tell you, and then I am going to go inside where the cornbread is cooling on the counter of my own kitchen, in my own house, in a place where my bones do not ache. The Lincoln Navigator in burgundy red? I bought it last month. It is parked outside this house every single morning and every single evening, and it is exactly as beautiful as I knew it would be, and I drive it without anyone's permission. And when the light hits the hood in the late afternoon, the color looks like something between fire and wine. And I think, that is mine. I made that possible. I am 74 years old, and I built that out of what I recovered from my own life. And no one will redirect it. And no one will tell me I was too emotional to understand how it works. I understood exactly how it works. I just finally decided to work it for myself. Now tell me something. Where are you listening from right now? Drop your city or your state in the comments. I want to know who is sitting with me tonight. And if any part of this story lives in your own chest, tell me, what would you have done? Would you have sent the email? Would you have changed the locks? Would you have looked that Lincoln Navigator in the eye a 3rd time and said yes? If this reached you, if you felt even one moment of recognition or anger or relief, press that like button so this story can reach the next woman sitting in her driveway, not ready to go inside. She needs to know that going inside and coming back out different is something that can be done. Subscribe, because I have more stories like this one, and none of them end with the woman disappearing quietly. None of them.